Hello, St. Paul's. My name's Stacey Daynard. I'm from the class of 1988. I'm also a teacher, counselor, and coach here at the school. Today, it's my great pleasure to speak with one of my 1988 fellow alumnus and very good friend, Mr. Jason Pronyk. Jason, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing really well. I'm dialing in today from Geneva, Switzerland, and where I've recently, within the last two weeks, taken on a new assignment inside the office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So hence that's the backdrop. But doing really well.
Awesome. Hey, let's start with just a quick Coles notes. 1988, we graduate high school here at St. Paul's. Give us a few highlights. How did you get from St. Paul's High School to your current position with the High Commission of Refugees for the United Nations?
Stacey, thank you very much, and a great privilege. And just first also to congratulate you on your recent nominee to the Manitoba Football Hall of Fame. And as you know, sports plays a tremendous role in both in my life and the life of my family. In fact, my younger brother Dan Pronyk, also St. Paul's graduate from '93. The late Dan Pronyk, fantastic kid, two Grey Cup berths with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And the big shout out also to the class of '88. But in response to your question, Stacey, I'd attribute to the evolution of my career humbly, of course, to broken into three parts: a local, a national, and an international. A local, meaning after graduating from both St. Paul's and then the University of Manitoba, following a gap year, I worked locally. Locally in Winnipeg with a small group of people. We set up something called the Teen Adventure Group, TAG, where we administered contracts with Manitoba Youth Center, working with largely Aboriginal kids in the PAG. And I think the second step forward, working nationally for an organization called Canada World Youth. Really important landmark, if you will, for new graduates. Canada World Youth is a development educational experience which twinned Canadian nationals with nationals from another country. And following that, working globally or working internationally. And that's when I joined the United Nations after leaving graduate school at Oxford. And worked for the United Nations now for the last 2 decades in a range of capacities, both a balance between our headquarters, working in New York, for the UN Development Program, or working on the front line in many cases: Afghanistan, Iraq, Indonesia, and yes, and now now Geneva.
You mentioned your younger brother Dan. I know your older brother Paul. All three of you graduates of our school. Why do you think your parents sent you here? Like, what is it that got your parents interested in St. Paul's High School educating their sons?
You're right. Both myself and Paul and Dan graduated from St. Paul's. But in response to your question, Stacey, I think two reasons. One was perhaps visionary, and the second natural. And what I mean by visionary is, we've come from humble backgrounds, and visionary in recognizing the importance of having a so-called ethical dimension, right, or a spiritual dimension. Again, the benefits of a Jesuit education that tries to educate young people not only by exposing them to good academic training, balanced by good spiritual training, balanced by what also young men and women need is the athletic component. And second, natural. And what I mean by natural, and I'll stand, and I think my camera moves somewhere. I'm sitting in this office in Geneva. I'll slowly stand up. What I mean by natural, right, is that they were both adventurous in their own ways. My father was one of the first males entered in a nursing program in that era. My mother came to Canada as dare I say, as a refugee on a cattle boat to Canada as a young girl, escaping the war, and natural because they both had it in their own sort of genetic makeup. That a refugee coming to Canada, wanting the best for their children and working day and night to make it happen. So it's perhaps not a coincidence that I'm standing in front of these billboards behind me that you see that says UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissions for Refugees. But that's a long answer to a short question.
I remember a few years ago at the freshman retreat where you spoke on the opening night, and one of the things you talked about that really stuck with me was you having two birthdays, and obviously the second birthday was a result of the UN mission in Iraq. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a little bit about the Iraq mission and more specifically the horrific bombing of the Canal Hotel in 2003, which cost some significant lives and some serious injuries. And what do you remember from that experience?
I was in Winnipeg in 2004, recovering, as you said, recovering from what was, you know, the largest attack on the United Nations in its history. You know, where we were actually extremely confident that the blue flag protected us. But it was a very different story on the 19th of August, 2003. You know, where a 3,000-ton truck laden with TNT and dynamite exploded, you know, outside my window, outside the headquarters of the Canal Hotel in Baghdad, killing 22 of my colleagues, injuring hundreds, and important also to put into context, what were we doing there? I had come out of Afghanistan in an earlier period during the state formation process, you know, where the UN has an invaluable role to play, working with the national authorities to coordinate, to support them on their own national development priorities. So on that morning on the 19th of August, the question is, what did I remember? On the 19th of August, I remember leaving, you know, a meeting with Sergio Vieira de Mello and two or three other colleagues at the Iraqi at the Governing Council, which was the decision-making body, the government that was in formation at the time, that was planning for their own, you know, future after the U.S. invasion. And yes, we returned to our office. It's called a Canal Hotel. It was really our headquarters. And then 4:30 in that afternoon is when we were attacked by Al Qaeda. And what I remember, I referred to it in 2004 as my second birthday, in part because Stacey, there's something called the golden hour. Now, what the golden hour is, it's that brilliant sunset that we see at the end of the day, or the sunrise, but in medical terms, it's really the moment after a traumatic injury in which medical treatment can prevent irreversible internal damage. So it's that golden hour. So I called it my second birthday because I was really lucky. I was really lucky in having access to, you know, in this case, a bit of background, having access to U.S. combat support crack unit, unit that specialized in head surgery. Guys that have a lot of experience in opening up heads, which in this case you really have to do fast. So I referred to it as my second birthday because the fortune to fall into the hands of a neurosurgeon, U.S. military unit, and was able to be evacuated from the building to a combat support hospital, and went through some repeated brain surgeries in Iraq and Kuwait and onwards in Germany. Whereas my colleagues, including Sergio, were a little bit further under the rubble than I was, falling at the bottom of the building. Sergio falling upside down. Other colleagues fell sitting in their chairs and lost their legs and had to be amputated to get out of the building. But for the purpose of your readers, I'd like two big takeaways. One is if everyone can, immediately after this, go to Netflix and watch Sergio the movie. It tells the story about one man's life as a Brazilian diplomat, likely to go on to be the second Secretary General, next Secretary General of the UN if he was not killed. And second is also, it's a book written by a woman named Samantha Power. She's currently the former U.S. ambassador to the UN. So two references. Third, I said only two, but third is, and I'm not sure when this will air, but the 19th of August, in recognition of what happened on that terrible day in Iraq in 2003, was declared by the United Nations General Assembly right, to be World Humanitarian Day, right,
Yes.
which is an opportunity to recognize frontline workers. So, Sissy, that is really a long answer for why I referred to it at that time when I was recovering in Winnipeg from multiple brain surgeries of the second birthday, because by some good luck and grace and skills of U.S. and neurosurgeons who I'm still in contact with, that I was able to live. Thanks.
Well, it was a powerful presentation at the freshman retreat. I know you keep up with as much as you can news in Canada, and certainly what's been near the forefront of news in Canada has been reconciliation and discoveries of unmarked graves, etc. Whether that's Kamloops, Saskatchewan, or other communities across our country. You've written a book on reconciliation. You've visited communities and countries that were struggling and in many cases still are with reconciliation. But on the lines of residential schools, any advice for Canadians? Any advice for Canadian political leaders if we had a chance to talk directly to them?
Some really interesting research on transitional justice. Transitional justice that I think that in Canada we've seen under the auspices of the Canadian Truth Commission, and led by His Excellency the Honourable Murray Sinclair, that published and came up with a series of findings and recommendations. But that's the opportunity that we have to sort of hold our own feet to the fire. Never mind politicians' feet to the fire. Simple things like the evidence of not only of mass graves. And that's where I've had enough of a chance to visit mass graves in post-genocide Rwanda, and my book documents it. It's called Paths to Justice and Truth, and the book concludes with the importance of individual justice, of accountability, of documenting historical wrongs, and it also concludes with reconciliation, being very much sort of an individual choice. In part as well by the recipient wanting to receive reconciliation. So it's in reconciliation it's a tough, it's maybe not an easy answer. So
it's a big question. It's a big national question, but I think you said it right too. It's we need to hold our individual feet to the fire as well. And how can we? I think one of the things the school has, obviously I'm biased, I've worked here for a long time, but one of the things that the school challenges everybody is to make the world a little better place in one way or another. And certainly that's an area in Canada that needs a lot of work. Speaking of students at St. Paul's, Jay, what would you say to a graduate of this year, 2021, who's socially conscious, wants to make the world a better place? What path or what advice would you give them to follow?
Excellent question. In 2021, we're at a profound historical juncture for young graduates. It's the advice is how deeply interconnected we are.
Yeah.
Right? Even before the onset of the shared threats, the global pandemic was declared a global pandemic on March the 13th, 2020. But not only are there a series of shared threats, there's also common opportunities for inclusive, equitable, peaceful, sustainable societies. One, I think first, being engaged and working locally, whether that's, as we've said already, volunteering in your local community. For the last 3 years, I was leading the UN volunteers across the Arab states and Europe and Central Asia before leading us to the UN's response to the Syria crisis. Second is, I think, the recognition that youth have a leading role to play, not following, a leading role to play to change social norms. Second is Stacey, you and I can put our masks on. I happen to have my New York City triathlon. We can put our masks on and have a normal conversation. So social norms are really easy to change, and that relies on youth, working with all of us to change consumption patterns, behaviors. And then third, at all costs, retain the spirit of the Jesuit education, right? Which is that that trilogy between physical, spiritual, and intellectual. And by that means you're looking outwards, you're doing something for others.
Yeah, I think young people, youth, recent grads are more influential than they sometimes give themselves credit for, and
Exactly.
they can be a great impetus for positive change. No question about that. Jay, as one who, as a person, myself, my wife, my son, we love to travel, and obviously we haven't been able to the last little while. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask one who has seen many parts of the world that I have not seen. Any favorite locations, my friend?
It's hard to single out one single moment. I think that in working in this the multilateral sphere, with the United Nations for over 2 decades, and specifically the development arm, right? You have a chance to somewhat be integrated, right, into communities. I don't want to overstate it. I was more integrated, in northern Uganda, where a favorite place or even a favorite moment was, swimming in the Nile River with Sudanese refugees who had run away from the war and were, living in a refugee camp. They knew nothing else, but when we got into the Nile and jumped off the dock together, we had a riot. As one example, as a favorite place or favorite moment, but it really depends. It's sort of, I'm describing it in such a way that it depends on the greatness and the spirit of the people around you. Which particularly in this context, the refugees context, is always strong. Second, attending weddings of my colleagues, in Gaza, Palestine, a place under occupation, considered the largest refugee camp in the world. Being invited to weddings and dancing until sunrise. That's a second. But third, and I'm a bit of a homeboy at heart. I need to make it home to Canada more frequently, but a homeboy at heart that I have the most fantastic memories of making bannock over a fire in any number of Manitoban provincial parks.
Any final words, Jay, before we're wrapping it up here?
Only a second shout out to the community, right? That I think this has been a great opportunity to dialogue. But whether you're dialoguing with me or really virtually anyone else, any other alumni and grads, I think do more of it. Final words is there's a mammoth treasure of experience, of either St. Paul's grads or otherwise. And I think that this platform of just having a dialogue is so, for me it's a great privilege to be sitting in my office doing it in Geneva. But the final words are just really do more of it. And thank you for giving me the opportunity and and inviting me. It's just, always a great privilege to stay in touch with you personally, right? As a as a leader in school and the community, but also with any viewers that may click on this link eventually.
Well, certainly a privilege to speak with you, Jason. And on behalf of St. Paul's High School, we really appreciate you taking the time as you are transitioning to your new position in Geneva. Let me say, on behalf of everybody that will see this, thank you for your dedication and commitment to the cause of human rights around the world. You truly are a global citizen, and stay safe and be well, my friend.